अगर आप इस्लाम को नहीं मानते तो आप क्या ईसाई हैं, आप हिंदू हैं कि या आप क्या वो शैतान की पूजा करते हैं
और क्या?
Yeah, so clarify that a little bit. Like, what do atheists believe in? अगर आप खुदा पे believe नहीं करते तो क्या believe करते हैं?
अगर आप मुसलमान नहीं हैं या आप खुदा पे यकीन नहीं रखते तो आप ला मजहब हैं। उर्दू में इसके लिए जुमला है, ला मजहब लफ्ज है atheism, ला मजहब। Let me just put it this way, अगर जितने भी religions हैं सब if they were different TV channels, ठीक है, कि एक डिज्नी चैनल हो गया, एक HBO हो गया और एक फलां हो गया, एक ARY, एक Jio हो गया, तो atheism is actually an off button. It is just the lack of deen, and that's really all there is.
Hello and welcome back to Puckcord. My name is Habib Ahmed and I'm the host of this podcast. This is our second episode, our part 2 for the Ali Rizvi series. The first episode was episode number 45, where Ali came to our podcast and he discussed how his search for identity led him to atheism, and he shared his life story alongside that too. If you haven't heard that episode already, I strongly recommend you do prior to this one. In this episode, he shares more of his mindset and how he thinks about Islam and the world around him, and of course Pakistan. This type of information was missing from the first recording that we did, and that's why Ali and I got on and did a second recording with this new insight from him. I also asked him how his family and friends took the decision to turn to atheism. And I also asked him more pointed, specific questions, such as, what if Islam was the right religion? Should Pakistanis feel threatened by atheism? What about the miracles of the Quran, which many scholars use to emphasize the authenticity of Islam? And if you don't follow a religion, where do you get your morality from? Ali gave his responses to these questions and also had a lot of questions to ask himself of other Pakistanis and Muslims. Towards the end, we also discussed the unity, or lack thereof, in the Muslim world and in Pakistan, and the struggle to define Sahih Islam or Sahih Muslim in this day and age of so many different mindsets, which contributes to so much of the confusion that Ali felt and a lot of Muslims feel today. A quick warning before we kick off this episode. This can be a very sensitive topic. There's a lot of content in this episode which might be offensive to especially more religious people. So if you are easily offended, I recommend that you don't listen to this episode. Just skip this one. However, if you do have a little bit of tolerance, I strongly recommend that you do listen to this episode, because not listening doesn't mean it doesn't exist. People like Ali do exist, and we need to understand how different people think so that we can think and strengthen our minds without feeling attacked. And that's why the format of this episode is not a debate. Even though I am a Muslim, I did not get into a debate with Ali, and my goal was to extract as much information out of him in this podcast for all of us to listen to. And to promote healthy dialogue, I believe that you can have a good conversation without conflict. So that said, let's continue the episode and pick up where we left off. You know what I think was missing was from the last time we spoke was, I'm not sure in how much detail we went into. I mean, we spoke about 9/11, we spoke about Pakistan a little bit, and we spoke about atheism a little bit too, but you didn't tell us exactly when it happened. You mentioned there were some events that kind of triggered it, but I'd love to know like what exact age you were around that time, and then how you kind of approached it, and then of course how you kind of revealed it, like came out of the closet, so to speak.
Masla ye hai ki, I've never actually quantified it. Matlab, these are things that are not easy to quantify.
Like it's hard to identify a single trigger.
Yeah, it was a process, right? I didn't necessarily choose this. It's just a process like anything. It's like accepting religion. It's the same way. You sort of gradually phase out of it. I think if I could articulate it the best way, in my opinion, is, and this is obviously just my experience on the matter, we talked a little bit about the regression of communities after 9/11. Mm-hmm. Communities like regressed back into their own sort of cocoons. They became sort of like hardened and like very strict. It kind of, to me, it exposed the type of groups we all were. We were frightened, we were fragile. And the ones that stood the test of that time were those that weren't sort of overtly religious people, from my perspective. So I think one of the main things in like the mid 2000s that happened to me was like I started noticing people when given the choice, whether you need to be religious or need to be more accepting, they chose the religious path because it was just the easiest thing to do. They were probably being attacked from all sides. They wanted to connect with their community, and their community wanted to be identified more, with religion. And it was not just a Muslim thing. I feel like it was a lot of different sort of religious groups, at least in the United States. So that was one of the single and most defining things I could think of. Obviously, it kept making me sort of angry that the more Muslim the community got, different communities that we had, the less they cared about Pakistan. And the more they would basically pick on Pakistan as a scapegoat. And by default, Pakistan was part of my identity. And so I was being attacked, even at my own mosque, Pakistan is the bad guy. That's why we're in this problem here. They supported the Taliban. They harbor Osama bin Laden and all this stuff. And no one was defending Pakistan. So that made me it kind of alienated me. Yeah. I internalized that and I was like, okay, well, let's look at this from a rational perspective. So that's where it started, I guess.
I remember you mentioning this a little bit, and I kind of related to it as well, which is feeling that exclusion from American society, right? Because you're a Muslim. And then when you go to the masjids to kind of identify more with people who are more similar to you, then there's an exclusion due to being Pakistani. And then, of course, when you speak to Pakistanis, at least I felt this, is we kind of had a whole different world and a whole different impression of things. Everybody else is wrong, only we are correct.
Pretty much.
In matters where others did not like us, as Pakistanis at least. I know
right.
that we have some sentiments, for example, in our history against Bangladesh.
Absolutely.
And Afghanistan, there's a lot of conflict there, I think, between people from those countries.
Also, because Pakistan was not included in conversations of identity after 9/11, I think the kids growing up, the Pakistani origin kids growing up in the West and particularly North America, I want to say, their only two logical choices when it came to Pakistani identity of any sort was either they identified with being Muslim, which meant largely meant, let's be realistic here, Arab culture, or Bollywood, which is Indian.
Yeah, very true.
There was no one support. Even people in the Pakistani community, they didn't. Even if you ask them today, it's hard for them to explain what Pakistani culture is. People ask me what Pakistani culture is. I typically point them towards Coke Studio. It's a good mix of secular, rational / religious identities that combine Pakistan, Sufi identities.
It's a personal frustration of mine, just this whole idea when I speak to people that are Pakistani right over here, or young kids especially, and I talk about, how Pakistani do you consider yourself? How much do you relate back? And they're like, I love Bollywood, I love Shah Rukh Khan and all that, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that kind of attacks that identity that it seems like we've been lacking all this time. What is Pakistani stuff, If we, for example, can we claim biryani? Not really. Biryani exists in India too.
Well, what I would say to that, and I'm not trolling. I used to troll, but now I've sort of articulated in a way that, honestly, the future of biryani is in Pakistani hands, bro. Because when biryani first came out, there was no country to claim it. You can say, because India didn't actually exist as a country before 1947. No matter what anybody says, it just didn't. So to say biryani is Indian is being a bit disingenuous. It's just not. It's true by technicality, because in present day India, in Delhi, in that area, that's probably where biryani originated.
Yeah.
But those people don't even eat meat properly, for God's sakes. For lack of a better word, for God's sakes.
Ironic.
Yeah, we've evolved the biryani to what it is today. We, as in people of Pakistani origin, all over Pakistan. So we run that shit.
Yeah, exactly. I've eaten at various Indian restaurants, and they have biryani, for example, on their menu. So the popular destinations where I guess biryani is famous in India are places like Hyderabad.
Yeah.
Where, there's a lot of Muslims. There's a lot of Mughlai cuisine that involves biryani.
Right.
And then, of course, we know that Lahore ki asli biryani hai.
I've never heard of a Lahore biryani, bro. Yeah. I guess I've heard of it. So my foray into atheism, I guess, was not necessarily direct. It was more like I was still religious. People often question me, okay, like, you were not religious at all in the first place. Well, I keep telling them, okay, I was religious. I wasn't overtly religious, but I knew like my hadiths. I read the namaz, roze rakta tha main. I was actually a hafiz of the first 3 pare before.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, that was ancient history.
First 3 pare, okay, yeah. I thought you meant surahs, because the first 3 surahs were, well, Surah Baqarah is pretty long.
Yeah, it's pretty long.
But yeah. I mean, still, the pare are pretty long too, so that's an accomplishment.
Yeah. But then they'll say things like, well, that doesn't really mean you're a Muslim. Like, they'll keep moving the goalpost, right? Unko jitni bhi proof la ke de do ke main tha Musliman. Ke nahi, matlab, they move the goalpost ke nahi. What real Muslim means is like XYZ, कि 6 मरतबा मतलब उम्रा करें या किया बंदे ने या स्कॉलर बन जाए 20 साल पढ़ के, like, come on, these are impossible standards, bro. Just
This is not kind of a promotion of atheism on my part, but I discuss this a lot as a kind of a criticism of our own people, which is often कि अगर हम पैदा मुसलमान ना होते तो हम में से कौन मुसलमान होता? How many of us would have kind of studied Islam to the extent that we make a decision that this is the right religion?
Right.
My argument would be there, maybe you'd agree, is that we are Muslim because we were born into it. Because there's actually a substantial amount of Pakistanis that I've noticed who have not read the Quran with meaning, with full translation. It bothers me a lot because, for example, ये पिछले से पिछले रोजे आए थे तो मेरी खाला I guess बोल रही थी लोगों को कि उन्होंने सिर्फ कोई किसी के बारे में बोल रही थी कि उन्होंने सिर्फ एक बार कुरान मजीद खत्म किया है रोज़ों में, and they're supposed to finish it 4 or 5 times. Like मेरे बच्चों ने तो 4-5 बार खत्म किया है, इतनी स्पीड से वो पढ़ते हैं. It's like Quran is like a speed contest. You just read it as fast as you can.
सच्चे मुस्लिम तो बस वही है ना वहाँ पे. Maybe I can do you one better. The thing is, that's a good example, but just the way I see it, and this is, I think it's a pretty respectful way of putting this. Like, if अगर फर्ज करो कि आज इस वक्त सब लोगों की मेमोरी वापस like वाइप हो जाए completely, right, and we sort of start over as humanity, right, so we will not get the same religions we have right now. There's just no way. To me, we will never have the same type of religions ever again. But like, one thing that would be constant would be science. Like, the laws of physics would not change, the law of gravity would not change, space would not change, but like every religion, every religious ethos and like mythology that we have in every single sort of religion would disappear.
I'm not sure if there's a scientist who said this, but there's obviously we're looking for extraterrestrial life, right? Like life outside of the earth. And suppose we actually ended up finding a civilization, like an intelligent species, intelligent civilization somewhere far out there, right? That would, I feel like it would answer a lot of questions. Because to what you're saying, if those people are just like any, like culture, they have a culture of their own. If those people are also questioning their existence,
right?
The odds are they'll have completely different religions from the religions that exist here on Earth. But I think from an Islamic point of view, our assumption would be if that type of place exists, then most likely a prophet would have been sent to that world as well.
That would be the logical...
A discovery of that type of world would answer a lot of questions, I guess, in favor of science or in favor of religion, one way or the other. Because the Islamic answer to your question would just be, well, if everybody's memory would be wiped, God would have a plan for that.
Yeah, but then so that's the thing. You get into suppositions that, and sort of these scenarios that you cannot touch.
I know.
So that's the fallacy right there, that you can't disprove it. So so I guess I don't see it as that black and white. So if aliens did show up, to me, it would have nothing to do with religion. It'd be like, okay, great, let's try to figure out the shit. Why are we here? Who are these people? What can we learn from them? That would be sort of my concern. Yeah. But I hear you. Yeah.
Right. So around what age were you when I guess you started asking these questions and you flipped the other way?
I was 25, I think, 26.
Okay, so this was a good, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 years after 9/11.
Yeah. 25. So 9/11, I was around 18. Like 5-6 years later, maybe 7 years.
So around like
something
2008.
Yeah, just maybe 2007, I would say. 2007 was when I completely made the hard,
Yeah.
Brexit हो गया था मेरा.
Yeah, I see. अपनी फैमिली को कब बताया?
तो मेरी फैमिली जो है, हम लोग की मतलब बातें चलती रहती थी इस तरह की ना कि I would talk to my mom, I would talk to people, my friends, family, just sort of question things. It'd be easier to question because I wanted to, I was religious and I wanted to like test the limits of my faith. And I wanted to make sure that, that's one way to like make sure everything's bulletproof, you check it, right? So I was just asked questions, and if I didn't get the answers, the default answer typically is like, "Ja, tum scholar se malum karo jaake." And then, like, fortunately for me, the internet, the scholars have like websites set up oftentimes, and you can literally ask questions. Sometimes you can call them, email them or go to the websites and stuff. If stuff didn't match up, when it came to like women's rights and things like that, it really made me like question things. And like, I just was not getting satisfactory answers. I wasn't seeking out with the goal of like, disproving the Shia Islam that I followed. I was desperately trying to like make sure it was a good faith. And it was until it wasn't, until it just doesn't offer the answers that you can rationalize. Whereas answers is from scientific perspective really appeal to me. And I'm not a scientist.
Okay, so then again, you said you had been having these conversations a lot with your family. तो ये बातें चलती रहती थी.
Right.
And I'm assuming you're the first person in your family who made this move.
So openly, yeah, I think so. I started sitting down with my friends and family, and I just used to tell them, like, I openly question, okay, well, this doesn't make sense to me. How can this be true?
Yeah.
I just don't, I don't buy it.
Did you ever get this reaction कि तुम बदतमीजी कर रहे हो, गुस्ताखी कर रहे हो from your family?
No, because if you are coming to it from a place of genuine curiosity and confidence, if the person you're talking to is really interested in like answering you or helping you find answers, they will not get mad. If they do, they are scared and they don't have the answers, and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of I guess you could say there's a lot of sensitive things in Islam, which just the fact that they're brought up sometimes can be a little worrying for some people. For example, I'm not sure in Shia Islam whether they believe the same thing, but it's a debated fact, I guess, that the Prophet married Aisha when she was about 9 years old.
Right.
He married her when she was 6, and then Rukhsati happened when she was 9.
Right.
So most Sunni Islam, that's the most authentic hadith that mentions that. There's other hadiths that say different ages. Some hadiths say she was 12, some say she was 15, some say she was 17, things like that. But whenever you bring that up, obviously you can approach that question in a type of way that it sounds very disrespectful by today's standards.
Right.
Did you have that type of thing, that type of discussion?
I did, but like I guess that was not my worry, because at least in most Shia schools of thought, the hadiths that they sort of go by, they all sort of like agree that she was close to 16 or 18.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so they don't have that issue. It's more of a sort of a maybe mainstream Sunni Islam issue where they don't really agree on which particular hadith is correct. So I didn't necessarily have that worry. And approaching this subject, it is it's very delicate. And again, I just want to remind anybody listening, this is my personal view. This is my journey. It has nothing to do with like anybody I know or my family or the faith I used to follow or the Muslim faith in general, or my community. These are my sort of my thoughts and things. My mom still doesn't accept me as a non-Muslim. She accepts me as her child, but like not as a non-Muslim. She's just refuses to believe it. But
so how does that go? Like you go visit her and she's okay with you though, right? She's like normal with you. But
yeah. I mean, I joke around a lot sometimes here and there, and I still say like the Islamic greetings and things like that, because again, this is culturally my culture, because I don't know how else to say goodbye to my mom except for Khuda Hafiz.
Yeah, isn't that ironic? Urdu में हैं कुछ लफ्ज़, I think, लेकिन बस हम इस्तेमाल इतने नहीं करते. Like non-religious ways of greetings.
Well, there is. So at least Urdu mein, most people still say, I don't know most people, like a lot of people still say Khuda Hafiz. Was like,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
yeah, and that has changed to Allah Hafiz now, by the way, because people want to move towards the real Islam, which is Arabic, and Khuda is a Persian word. So
it's a Persian word. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and Khuda typically implies like God, not necessarily Allah specifically, but God in general. तो कहते हैं कि खुदा जी कोई भी हो सकता है, खुदा हजारों होते हैं खुदा, तो इसलिए हम खुदा हाफिज नहीं कहते.
I mean, I would say that if you believe in one God, then when you say Khuda, wouldn't that be referring to that God anyway?
Well, जी नहीं, आप शिरक कर रहे हैं, आपको तो पता है जी, अल्लाह तो अल्लाह होता है. तो that's sort of like the...
Yeah, it's kind of a linguistic battle, I think. It's just another one of those, Arabic is better than Persian things.
Yeah, and there's multiple political layers and bigotry involved there too. So there's a lot of sort of... But my point is, I'm not going to make I'm not going to create an atheist Khuda Hafiz, you know what I'm saying? It just doesn't exist. It's just, that's not how culture works. It evolves over thousands of years.
Even I'm just searching on Google Translate right now. And I searched goodbye in Urdu, and I got Khuda Hafiz.
Yeah.
And I searched bye, and I got Alwida. So Alwida could work, right? But again, that's so formal. It doesn't, like, most people don't use it.
That's the nature of Urdu. It's so formal that people have sort of, So Alwida would be a good word to say goodbye, and then to say hello would be adabars. That was a very secular way of greeting people of Hindu backgrounds, Christian backgrounds, and non-Muslims background. Right. So adabars. Adab meaning I bring you greetings, right? So right. That I still use that.
Yeah. Okay. Depending on the listener, I feel like most people are aware of atheism, but maybe for some of the listeners, this is still a relatively new concept. Like, if you don't believe in Islam, अगर आप इस्लाम को नहीं मानते तो आप क्या ईसाई हैं, आप हिंदू हैं कि या आप क्या शैतान की पूजा करते हैं or something like that.
और क्या?
Yeah, so clarify that a little bit. Like, what do atheists believe in? अगर आप खुदा पे believe नहीं करते तो क्या believe करते हैं?
अगर आप मुसलमान नहीं हैं या आप खुदा पे यकीन नहीं रखते तो आप ला मजहब हैं. उर्दू में इसके लिए जुमला है, ला मजहब लफ्ज़ है, atheism, ला मजहब. Let me just put it this way. अगर जितने भी religions हैं सब, if they were different TV channels, ठीक है, कि एक डिज्नी चैनल हो गया, एक HBO हो गया, और एक फलां हो गया, एक ARY, एक Jio हो गया, तो atheism is actually an off button. It is just the lack of deen, and that's really all there is. It's just it's not a cohesive group. People often think कि ये atheist फिरका है, फलां है, ढिमकाना है. भाई atheist फिरका है ही नहीं. इसमें the thing is, anybody who doesn't have religious belief is automatically La Mazhab is an atheist. It just is. Whether they live in an igloo like in Eskimo land in Alaska, whether they live like in Maldives, whether they live in Africa, they don't have to be connected. They don't have a reason to. There's no one specific way to follow anything because there's nothing to follow. That's the best way I've come up with to explain it.
Yeah. And while we're at it, could you differentiate between atheism and agnosticism?
Well, this is my personal interpretation of it, right? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a philosopher. Agnosticism, मेरे ख्याल में वो स्टेज है जिसमें लोग यकीन मानते हैं कि कोई खुदा है, कोई ना कोई चीज़ है, निज़ाम को चला रही है. ये नहीं पता कौन है, मगर कोई ना कुछ है. तो इसलिए मैं, to be better safe than sorry.
Yeah, sounds like a Nusrat Fateh Ali Qawwali.
Hence the Sufi theme there. Sufism is very vague on purpose. I like partying, but I also like God. That's kind of like their theme. I like getting intoxicated, but it's for God. So if there is a God, I'm good. So that type of thing. And atheism, from what I understand, is simply a lack. I mean, I have no interest in like worrying about a magical power that's going to punish me or reward me, because the things I do I do them because I think about these things and they come from me,
Yeah. Have you ever thought about is there a sliver of chance Islam is the correct religion? And then what's going to happen to you after you die and you find out there is God?
बहुत सोचा है भाई. बहुत सोचा है. Back when I was a Muslim, still a Muslim, बहुत सोचा है. And then, and I couldn't sleep. It's a very hard thing to even consider, let alone think about it in great detail. So, if let's say I die, okay, and let's say the God is real, let's say, okay, basically what's going to happen is this God, she or he, will say, look at my record. I'm guessing that's how it works, right? Still, I've left Islam like 12 years ago, but I'm pretty sure it still works like that.
Yeah, I don't think much has changed since then.
So what this entity will see is that I have lived my life pretty decently. Like I am privileged now. I make good money. My wife makes good money, and I donate to ED. I've donated most money to ED than anybody I know. I'm not trying to brag. I volunteer at soup kitchens when I can. I often lend my help to people that are on the side of the streets, not because of religion. It's because, that's something that I just think it's right. I have never killed anybody. I have never taken a bribe. These are basic things. I have not screwed over anybody or harmed anybody. I don't intend to do that. I tell stories for a living on film. I don't make porn. You know what I'm saying? So if anything, this deity will be like, they will actually shake my hand and congratulate me for being a good human being. That's what, if there was a fair and benevolent God, that's what would happen even if I wasn't Muslim. And if they're not benevolent, then if I get sent to hell, then there's no benevolence there. So what's the point of following something like that out of fear? And I'm confident I go to sleep okay because of this type of thinking. I'm a good person. I don't have to worry about these things.
I feel like what you just mentioned is, again, going back to that agnostic versus atheist thing, that's something that possibly agnostics would think of as well. That there is probably a God, but if he is just, then, me being a good, regular, normal person and, not doing anything wrong in life, I should land in heaven without having to follow practices of like Judaism or Islam or Christianity or anything like that.
Right.
So that sounds like from what I'm reading here and from what you mentioned about agnostics, it sounds like that type of concept.
Whatever helps you sleep at night, honestly. For me, I'm okay with it. It just, this type of stuff takes a lot of sort of room in people's heads, potentially. Like, I have other shit to worry about, dude. There's diapers to be changed at home when I get home tonight.
How old is your kid?
He's 8 months old.
8 months. Oh wow.
Yes.
That's great. I was gonna say mashallah.
Yeah, koi baat nahi. Shukriya. So I'll give you this bit, okay? People in my family, younger generation, as well as my wife's circle, counting families from my friends' circles in Houston and Pakistan too. One kid in each family of like 3 out of 3 kids is definitely leaning towards, or is closeted, or has inquired, or has posted about like these things that I'm talking to you about. And they often reach out to me specifically because I sort of like put these things on Facebook and Twitter oftentimes openly. And they ask me the same type of questions that you're asking me right now, often with the intention of not because they hate Islam, not because they hate their Sunni faith, not because they hate their Shia faith or whatever, but because they're genuinely interested in like what I found. I feel like it is definitely a growing thing. I wouldn't call it a trend. I think it's just a consequence of having a relatively more open society that we live in.
Yeah.
The internet is very big in that. And, your bubble is going to get smaller and smaller in the future as you go along.
I think it's something that's been happening to Christianity for some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's started happening Islam in a more accelerated fashion after 9/11 possibly. It's interesting how that happened, but I felt like Muslims were much better at keeping to they could go out and sin as much as they want, but they still stuck to their faith a lot more closely than Christians did in the West. Christians kind of gave up their religion 100 years ago. Well, many of them.
Yeah, many of them did, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We can speculate all night, what the real reasons are, but
That's the thing. Yeah. I feel like a lot of the Muslims and a lot of the more religious Muslims listening in will be really curious what's causing this, because I feel like a lot of people while listening to this are feeling panic, maybe, you know, कि वाकई ऐसे हो रहा है, like what's happening to our kids? Maybe I should go check up on my nephews. कि वो क्या, you know, बातें करते रहते हैं.
I would say कि I would not panic. If you're listening to this and you're panicking, don't panic. It's okay. You know, basically, maybe this is how your faith evolves to adapt to the modern time. Maybe it goes to the edge and then it gets reformed. All different branches reform and they reinterpret themselves in a way that can offer confidently and tackle, like, you know, the issues that we have today. Maybe. Because ultimately that's what religion is, right? It's just a way for people to get together and live in societies. Although I would argue we have constitutions now, people can get together and do the same thing in courts. But back then, religion was the best way to do that, like thousands of years ago. So it's an evolutionary project.
Isn't it ironic? I feel like a lot of the people who have turned to atheism, you know, speaking to you, speaking to a few other people from Islam, they don't make that decision willy-nilly. They usually study the religion more. And usually studying anything is not a bad thing, usually, right? So if you're studying your own religion, it often leads people to become more religious, in fact, which would be rational.
I've seen that happen.
Which makes sense. But then the opposite happens too. Some people study their own religion and then the complete opposite effect happens and they just dwindle away. So it's the same amount of study with the same exact references. We have the Quran and the Hadith and these sources of truth as they are in our religion. Right. Yet it can lead, studying those sources can lead people to different paths. I find that so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the human mind is weird.
Yeah. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Do you think people should feel threatened by atheism growing out of Pakistanis and Muslims? I'm not sure how this is affecting Pakistanis within Pakistan, although on Discord I see quite a few of them who are again closet atheists. लेकिन काफ़ी उनमें से बच्चे हैं, काफ़ी 17-18 साल के 16 साल के बच्चे हैं, तो उन्होंने अभी सही तरह, they're still kind of figuring out what they want to do in life, let alone who they are in life. So that's a separate thing. But yeah, I guess over here in the West, do you think atheism should be regarded as a threat, or as in any way, like does that make you less of a Pakistani by being an atheist?
यार that's the constant battle. मैं जिसको अगर बता दूं कि पाकिस्तानी हो तो वो फौरन इस्लाम के बारे में बातें शुरू कर देते हैं, you know, या चाहे गोरा हो, चाहे काला हो, चाहे पाकिस्तानी हो बंदा. The default is कि तुम सुन्नी इस्लाम, you know, से ताल्लुक़ रखते हो in some way.
Yeah.
मैं बताने की कोशिश करता हूँ कि पाकिस्तान जो है वो, yes, it was formed for people of Muslim background, मगर it was not formed with the intention of being a theocracy. I would argue that.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, because people say that it was always meant to be a Muslim theocracy. In the sense that Qaid-e-Azam ka Pakistan tha. Abhi je khud itni history ka khud nahi itna pata. But Islamic State of Pakistan.
यार 50s में जाके नाम चेंज हुआ है पाकिस्तान का कि इस्लामी जमहूरियत of Pakistan. Before that, it was a dominion of Pakistan. And the people that like helped create and fund Pakistan in the beginning, obviously a majority of them were Sunni, but like the leading effort was from like Shia people and also a lot of Ahmadi folks, believe it or not. Do you think they wanted like the type of Shariat we have in Pakistan right now? Do you think that's what their intention was when they said we need a homeland for Muslims?
Of course not, no.
You know, Jinnah was like, you know, I just fail to see it. I just, you know, Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, this came in the 70s, 80s, man. ज़ियाउल हक के पास शुरू हुआ है. You know, उससे पहले क्या मतलब था पाकिस्तान का? मतलब हम लोग काफिर थे उससे पहले? Okay, so here's the threat question is, I'll answer this for you right now. अगर आपका दीन और अगर आपका खुदा या आपके prophets अगर वो लरज़ जाते हैं कुछ अल्फाजों से, तो उसका मतलब है आपका खुदा, आप और आपका दीन कमज़ोर हैं. And you need to work on that. If that's all it takes, man. You know, that's the issue. If you can't handle a few words, you should feel threatened then. You're terrible at what you do.
Is this kind of have you been keeping up with the whole blasphemy law
Of
in
course.
Pakistan.
Of course.
Most recently, I was just reading, actually 2 days ago, this guy, and he's actually a Muslim guy, ironically.
Yeah. Junaid something.
Junaid Hafiz, yeah, you're right. Yeah, he was a teacher, and they accused him of tweeting anti-Islamic statements
Right.
with a fake account or something. वो भी पता नहीं कैसे prove कर लिया, लेकिन
Right.
he's been in solitary confinement for the most part, in jail for the last 6 years. I find that ridiculous. It's crazy.
It is.
Solitary confinement, and then now he's been sentenced to death. But the Chesal, I
Yeah.
can't even imagine for 6 years that somebody is sitting completely alone in a dark chamber.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
For number one, what could possibly be a false accusation? Or number two, it could be a real thing. It could be a real accusation. Maybe he had a different viewpoint. But yeah, doesn't that seem a bit over the top, that punishment?
जहाँ तक मेरा ख्याल है, of course, क्योंकि हजरत मोहम्मद जो हैं, प्रॉफिट जो हैं, उन पे लोग कचरा फेंका करते थे लोग, और क्या क्या फेंका, पत्थर वत्थर फेंका करते थे, according to the hadith, right? As if you want to take it on its word. When the prophet came to power, people still came to argue with him. Have you ever heard of a blasphemy law from Medina ki riyasat mein? Not that I know of. Not a formalized blasphemy law.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on this topic several years ago, and this is kind of following a theme of a much larger theme. Ke hadith mein, at least from the Sunni body of hadith, there's a lot of conflicting hadiths, which make it really difficult to draw a
Sahih.
kind of a solid conclusion. And so around this blasphemy, there's actually proponents of blasphemy, the law, actually have some hadiths that back up their viewpoints as well.
Okay, interesting.
But I found myself sympathizing more with the ones that you mentioned, like the prophet was thrown stones and he said कि मैं इनके लिए दुआ पढ़ता हूँ, बच्चों के लिए, लोगों के लिए. Again, the hadith has been really difficult very difficult not to crack. And that's part of the reason why Islamic law, like you were mentioning in our last recording, the Islamic law is so difficult to define. Because
there's no one
for
thing.
one thing, there's many different, exactly.
Yeah.
Like नमाज पढ़ने के इतने तरीके हैं.
Yeah.
If you thought about that, नमाज पढ़ने के इतने तरीके हैं, और मुझे बताया जाता था कि जो लोग आमीन बोलते हैं, those people are Wahabi. It turned out that no, it's actually a school of thought. It's not a Wahabi thing. It's just one school that actually believes in that. The other school doesn't.
Yeah, I would say just, the best thing to do is read and understand and be confident and don't take offense. And it's okay to take offense, because you will notice no one has ever died from being offended. So learn to take a word,
Well, yeah, nobody's died from being offended, but people have died from being offensive, and that's the whole issue. Touche. In our Muslim countries.
Touche. It's a good point.
That kind of leads us to actually, we have a way that people convert people to Islam, which is often usually like, there's a bunch of religions out there, but our scholars often use the scientific miracles method, which is कि कुरान में इतनी miracles हैं, इतना knowledge है, जो and not no other religion has this many facts. So, and I gotta admit, a lot of the ones that I've read as well are very impressive.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that. Like, did you think about that while you were converting out?
Yeah, it sticks out as a sore thumb in the face of atheism, right? I mean, how do you explain that, atheist?
I want to share a few examples. I don't have them all written down, but one of them, for example, was just that a very common one, right? Everybody believed the earth was flat, and the Quran mentioned that earth was, I don't know the exact terminology there, but with some inferences, the Quran proves that the earth is actually round. Whereas the Bible, for example, has clearly mentioned like the four corners of the earth in a few of its verses, actually. Four corners of the earth.
You're right. I mean, and then the other one being the embryology stuff, right? That's in the Quran.
Yeah, right. How an embryo grows.
How did this seemingly scientific knowledge end up in the Quran? Seemingly written or, received by somebody who was not sort of like, didn't go to school, supposedly, Yeah, these are things, these are good questions to ask. So I can address how I approach it, this whole issue. Especially, I'm not a doctor. Okay, I'm not going to talk about कि embryo कहाँ से आता है. You can do a little bit of research. The first thing is we have to understand where the Prophet lived and was like in Makkah, Medina, Makkah में रहते थे, right? Back then, Makkah was actually the central trade route for pretty much the known world, because it was in the middle of Europe and the middle of Africa and Asia. Like for the known world back then, every trade sort of went through, and in fact, the Prophet and his tribe were traders, as you know, and they were well-off traders. So like all the best stuff came through Makkah and those trade routes from Europe, from Africa, from Asia. So anyway, this is a fact. Everybody knows this. Muslims tout it. That's fine. The other thing is, the thing with the embryo knowledge is it was actually discovered. This was like a known scientific fact of the time. And how we know this is because like 500 years or 400 years ago, before Islam came into existence, there was a Greek sort of philosopher, a scientist named Galen. And you can Google this. This is not my personal opinion. And basically he used to experiment on bodies, and he would basically like write stuff down. And this exact stuff that he wrote appears in the Quran, almost word by word, translate. But how did the Prophet know about this in the first place? But the thing is, here's the thing. So one of the leading sort of doctors in Arabia at that time, his name was Harith ibn Qalada. He became one of the Prophet's like closest sahabis because of his medical knowledge, essentially his doctor. So you could see where the transfer of knowledge, how this happens, because this is known knowledge of the time from the Greeks. It comes down to the trade routes. Somebody of the medical practice in the area understands it, later becomes a disciple of the Prophet. That's how. And the Quran wasn't nazil, ekdam se nazil nahi hua tha. You know this, right? Nazil hua tha over a long period of time.
Over time. Yeah.
So that's and you know how we know this exact thing, because not only the stuff that Galen wrote appears in the Quran, but it's also wrong. We've proven it's relatively wrong. It appears like the order of like basically like the descriptions are like right, but like what the stuff does is wrong. There's like research papers about this stuff. So while relatively scientific looking knowledge exists in the Quran, for sure, absolutely. Same thing with the round Earth. The Earth was discovered to be round. I want to say like 600, 700 years before Islam came, before Christianity, in fact. I'm trying to remember, again, I think it was the ancient Greeks. The guy named, the Pythagorean theorem is named after this guy, the Greek guy, Pythagoras. Yeah, he discovered, it was him. He was the one who kind of came up with, the Earth is probably round. And again, the Middle East traded a lot with ancient Greece and Egypt back then, and those places used to be hubs of knowledge before they disappeared. So these were known facts. These were not something that was sort of suddenly came out of nowhere, And by the way, the Prophet at the time was actually as educated as a person could get. They didn't have schools back then, so there was a lot of oral sort of education, and he was sort of privileged in the sense where he belonged to a tribe of like traders, and at that point, traders were basically ruled countries and regions.
Well, wasn't it a common statement that he didn't know how to read, and that's one of the reasons why the Quran came as a miracle?
I can't comment on that because I don't know, but I can just only comment on things that you're saying about like how is the stuff present in the Quran, and also like. There's no evidence of him writing anything in I think the first Quran was written by either Hazrat Umar, Hazrat Ali, or Usman. I don't know which one. It was one of the Khalifas who actually wrote it.
Yeah, because most of the Quran was actually spoken through. Well, it was spoken. It was memorized.
There you go. So that's kind of how I approach this. I'm not very impressed by it, I guess.
So you're saying basically most of it is explainable because.
It already existed. This was known knowledge at the time. It just was. There's just no way around it. I'll tell you this much. I mean, if you're presenting the Quran as some sort of a scientific proof in a court of law, in a secular court of law, unbiased, relatively unbiased, it will not hold up. It will not hold up. There's just no way. There's nothing verifiable in there that peer-reviewed research can, There's a reason why in scientific journals, in peer-reviewed journals, they don't use the Quran as a justification of like, that's why we have isolated this DNA, this isotope. No, they do it via the scientific method. They do it where somebody on the other side of the world who knows nothing about you can take those same raw materials and come to the same conclusions. It's science and not religion for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think most Muslims actually will agree to it. Most Muslim scholars agree to it, that there is that faith aspect in the religion. Meaning at the end of the day, you have to have that iman. Okay, this is the right religion. If all the answers were in there, then every single person would be a Muslim, undoubtedly. But obviously there's a gray area.
Same.
That's where the faith part comes in.
Oh yeah, that's...
जब लोग कहते हैं आपका ईमान कमजोर है.
तो होगा तो मैं क्या करूं? That's the answer to that. Yeah, अंकल्स को बहुत शौक है कि आप ऐसा है नहीं है, ऐसा ईमान है आपका. अंकल आप जाके सो जाएं भाई. आप अपने काम से काम रखें. अब सलाहियत नहीं चाहिए अपने काम से काम रखने की, Mind your own fucking business. Like, तुम्हें क्या हो गया? कौन कोई गोश्त खा रहा है कहीं से और कहीं से लाके खा रहा है? तुम्हें क्या हो रहा है? तुम्हारे बिल कोई, you're gonna have to pay for your own bills. No one else is like preventing you from like living your life. So going forward, I mean, that's how you have to think. I mean, the world is getting very small.
Wait, गोश्त का क्या एग्जांपल था यहाँ
पे?
वो
तो हलाल हराम, झटके का गोश्त और फलां ये वो या इसमें इन्होंने मतलब chocolate bar में इन्होंने वो pig मिला देते हैं ये क्या, and just any number of things, bro. Just
Well, I have a cousin actually who's very religious, and it's a funny story. He became very religious. He wasn't very religious before. He was like a party goer. हर किस्म के उसने गुनाह किए हुए थे, लेकिन वो अलग बात. फिर एकदम super religious हो गया, and it came to the point के हलाल गोश्त खरीदना तो एक बार वो सीधा फैक्ट्री पे पहुंच जाता था. He went to the factory to see. Yeah, make sure कि वो ज़बिया काटते हैं कि नहीं, सारी पूरी जाके investigation कर रहे हैं, सवाल वगैरह पूछ रहे हैं उनको. And then even when you eat at a restaurant, जिधर हलाल clearly लिखा हुआ है menu पे, या उनको पूछिए उन्होंने क्या दिया हलाल है, that's not enough. Like you have to find out who their
supplier,
who their distributor is. Yeah, where you buying your meat from.
Where they pray और किस तरह हाथ बंद करते हैं या खोलते हैं.
Yeah, हम कई बार ये बहस करते थे कि यहाँ तो आपने इतनी इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर ली, लेकिन पाकिस्तान जाके हम नहीं करते. आई फील लाइक इन पाकिस्तान यू नीड मोर. उधर हम अज्यूम कर लेते हैं कि सारे कुछ हलाल है, लेकिन
और हलाल का मतलब आप very vague too कि is he treating the animal right? Is this person, इतनी बेदर्दी से रखते हैं वो camels को और cattle को कि आप तो बेहोश ही हो जाए. आप हलाल करने इन्वेस्टिगेट निकले, आप बेहोश हो जाएंगे. आप जाके देख के ना फार्म जाए कभी आप यहाँ पे भैंसे पालते हैं.
Do you think it's difficult to be an atheist?
Yeah, for somebody who's kind of attempts to be woke like me, I find that in today's world, no matter where I go, I'm kind of caught between like a crusade between like religions. जहाँ पे जाओ ना लड़ाई हो रही होती है and you're caught in the middle. मैं DC में रहता हूँ. I mean, there's always war and Christmas and फला ढिमकाना going on there, drama. आप इंडिया जाएं, आप पाकिस्तान जाएं, it's just, not only is it difficult to be an atheist and live your life, but you have to protect yourself from like anything sort of the overtly religious are attempting to throw at you and involve you in. So that's just a dramatic aspect of it. But yeah, there's a lot of things, like everything that we do is, revolved. I have to like जिस तरह मुसलमान होते हैं, हर चीज में जब if you live in the West, कि हलाल हराम का चक्कर होता है, कि ढूंढना होता है कि क्या चीज हलाल है, क्या चीज हराम है, किसी चीज में मिलावट हुई भी है नहीं. It's the same way for me as an atheist here, where, for example, if I'm donating to a charity, I must figure out if it's a Christian charity or a religious charity or not, because oftentimes religious charities favor people who are of that religion. Like, I think the Purple Heart, for example, absolutely batshit insane, but they're everywhere and they're sort of, no one really talks about it. Salvation Army, same thing.
Yeah.
So I have my own halal haram issues, and they typically revolve around morality and sort of rationalism. Like, is this organization being kind? How is my money being affected? It has nothing to do with religion. But I find myself sort of doing this halal haram thing in my own way all the time.
How do you define your morality? Where do you get that from? Like, who tells you कि चोरी करना बुरा है या किसी को कत्ल करना बुरा बुरी चीज है? A lot of people feel that you need religion to put those guidelines for yourself.
Oh man, you got me. I'm gonna turn Muslim tomorrow, bro. Well done.
You were definitely a troll in the past.
Yeah. I had a phase. Everybody's had a phase. People do ask me that all the time. इसके लिए इतना मुश्किल नहीं है answer क्योंकि we've had societies well before Islam. We will continue to have them after the religion is gone. There have been like 3,000 gods and thousands of gods in the past. I don't think any of them have ever influenced morality in one way, shape, or form. And if they have, only artificially. For me, morality comes from myself. I feel morality comes from ourselves. In fact, because it's an evolutionary thing. Like we've developed ways to live in groups so that lions and tigers don't kill us while we lived in caves. We organized in caves and agreed to not kill each other in order to fight existential threats. We were nice to each other so the lions, somebody could watch the lions, it was like a primitive way of ensuring our survival. That has evolved into rules and regulations in today's world. What we have on paper nowadays called laws. Laws are morals because we all agree that they are, not just because Jesus told us or Hanuman insisted that this is moral. We all obey them out of our own free will. That's where morality comes from, not from religion. That's my view on it anyway. So.
Yeah, I see. I guess just getting to the root of the problem, right? Root ye ke jab log apne nahi lagte na, then you kind of get outcasted. और ये हमारी पाकिस्तानी society में तो खास तौर पे बहुत है. I think human beings as a species, right? We try to look for inclusion. We try to find people who are like us to be our friends, who are like us, to get married to and things like that. So, for example, why is it controversial for a Muslim to marry a Hindu? उसकी वजह ये है कि वो अपने नहीं लगते. उनका culture बिल्कुल अलग है, उनका lifestyle बिल्कुल अलग है. And so similarly, this is something that I feel like you might be dealing with. If not, then maybe other people are dealing with when they kind of leave the religion. How would you kind of set those people at ease कि we are still Pakistani, हम फिर भी आप जैसे ही लोग हैं.
Right.
We can still mix, we can still be friends, we can still be normal with each other.
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that. To be honest, the straight answer is I don't know. The other answer would be, my purpose in life is to sort of rehab the image associated with the name Pakistan. It's a selfish desire to help heal that sort of thing, that word. So people may look, and my life in the world would be easier when I travel. And as a result, I have become more Pakistani than anybody I know. Like, लोग कहते हैं यार तुम कुछ ज़्यादा ही वो नहीं हो गया कुछ कि कुछ ज़्यादा ही हर चीज़ में पाकिस्तान घुसेड़ देते हो अंदर यार because पाकिस्तान मेरे अंदर है. Just like the United States, it's part of me. The United States is part of me, and my Muslim background is also part of me. I don't want anybody to like suffer because they're Muslim. I do defend these things when I need to, but I found my sort of goal in life, and that is to sort of rehab my image, which has been disrupted by people of ironically, people of Muslim faiths and people of Pakistani background. I have picked up a lot of allies as a result, and I picked up a community of sorts. That's why people sort of, any project that I do in my work, it's translated into everything. Anything I'm doing, when I have like non-Pakistani people over at my house for a dinner or a birthday party, I make sure every time they say something related to Pakistan, I correct them. I introduce them to Coke Studio. I introduce them to people, bloggers from Pakistan. I introduced them to things about Pakistan that could benefit their sort of idea.
Yeah.
And in that, I've found community all over the world.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Like you mentioned, Kay, you still follow a lot of Muslim practices. You follow the greetings. You follow.
So what else would you say to your mom? What's up, bro?
Yeah. Pakistani culture is so ingrained in the religion too. That does, even if you leave the religion, if you want to follow the culture or the nationality, it still sticks with you, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I love Ruafza, bro. रमजान में तो चलता है, दूध में मिलाओ, जिसमें मिलाओ, whatever. मैं तो ड्रिंक में मिला देता हूँ.
Yeah, I hear you. Does it bother you that if you were living in another country, a Muslim country, Pakistan में तो मेरे ख्याल में अभी तक ये law नहीं है, लेकिन in other countries that being an atheist could get you hung or sentenced to death or imprisonment at the least in some countries for being openly expressive about yourself?
Absolutely. Even in Texas, where you and I have roots, we are not allowed to hold public office. We're atheists, technically speaking. I mean, it's written down in the Constitution of Texas.
Interesting. Yeah.
So this is an uphill battle. This is the battle for sort of humanity, and we have to talk about these things, point them out, no matter where we see them. For me, that places like Texas or Pakistan. Pakistan में bigotry hai. I'm sure hand laws against atheism. I just don't know of them. I'm sure there's something there. If not on the state level, it's not the federal level, then professional level. I'm sure होगा कुछ ना कुछ होगा.
So was that part of your thinking as well around that time? Okay, all the bad things that are happening in the world. If there was a God, then those would not be happening.
I mean, if a divine, benevolent, and omnipotent entity allows for that to happen, then the benevolence part is not believable for me. यार बच्चे जो पैदा होते हैं with AIDS and cancerous tumors, I know a few friends with children like that. I can't imagine what the parents go through, man. Like, who deserves that? कि नहीं यार जन्नत मिल जाएगी, बच्चा मर जाएगा तो, like, what kind of like answer is that? What kind of a f***ing answer? If you have kids, I urge you to listen to somebody like that in person, and I urge you to stop yourself from like punching this person in the face, because that's what it feels like. I just don't see the benevolence of it. I just don't see the benevolence of it. And if you think the bad things are all the fault of the sins and the good things are all fault of God, why are you like only crediting the good stuff to God? Why not? If he's the omnipotent, she's the omnipotent and benevolent thing that controls everything, why don't you always also credit the bad stuff with God too? Like, give them all the credit.
You're saying, for example, अगर कुछ अच्छा होता है तो हम बोलते हैं अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह, मेरी जॉब लग गई है, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह बच्चा मेरा हुआ है.
सही.
लेकिन जब कोई बुरी चीज होती है, then obviously we don't do that.
Must be my fault, or मैंने कुछ कर दिया होगा, या शैतान के कुछ चक्कर
नजर लग गई है,
कोई किसी और का मसला. Yeah, exactly. किसी और ने नजर लगा दी, किसी और ने लगा दी.
काला जादू, काला जादू, नीला जादू.
गोरा जादू कभी नहीं होता, हमेशा काला होता है. We know that's.
Yeah, जो I don't know about the colorful jadus.
Like, here's another thing. Like, my parents used to tell me back then, when we were in Pakistan, and they would warn me, like, hey, be careful when you go out. Don't tell people you're Shia, because there's a lot of extremism here, and this is what often sometimes Sunnis will do. And in Ziaul Haq's time, they did do these things to people. Like the corporal punishment, Islamic style, was evident and it was there. But then when we grew up and we were in a safer environment in the United States, and my parents turned religious themselves, and I started going to the mosque, and I realized we have the same shit. It's just because we didn't have the chance to practice it. Iran is the same way, same as Saudi Arabia, and quite a few other countries in that same way. It makes people who are weak afraid, as opposed to more pious.
Yeah, I agree with what you're getting at there, because I often argue for this. If there's a system that we have, like a governing system that gives absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
That is something that we have to be wary of. Perhaps there is a good way to apply Islamic law. I don't know, but I've never seen it.
Well, that's what's called a no true Scotsman fallacy. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
No true Scotsman. So the euphemism is that people in Scotland are very proud of being Scottish. No matter जिस Scottish बंदे को सामने ले आओ अपने, कहेंगे ये Scottish बंदा नहीं है क्योंकि असली Scottish बंदा ऐसा होता है. And that Scotsman does not exist, just this perfect Scotsman.
Interesting.
ऐसी शरीयत नहीं चाहिए, मैं ऐसी होनी चाहिए, असली इस्लाम ऐसा होता है. असली इस्लाम क्या है भाई? अगर असली इस्लाम, there's no such thing. It's just not. There's no such thing as shariat. There's no such thing as asli shariat. There either is or isn't. I know this is like an existential sort of like a conversation that we're going into, but that's the fallacy. You can't disprove it, but you strive for this ideal that doesn't exist and never will because it's not practical.
I hear what you're saying there, because I'm just thinking about my own family life and the number of people that we've excluded, the number of groups that we have excluded from the kind of the fold of Islam based on our own definition. It just raises that question over and over again, कि Islam को कैसे हम define करें? For example, चलो, हमारी family में, for example, मेरी family circle में अहमदिया को बाहर निकाल दिया. Shias are also not considered true Muslims.
Yeah, of course. Well, they're the number one enemy.
Yeah. Then they're within Sunnis. वो फलाने बंदे खत्म नहीं पढ़ते, उनको बाहर निकाल दो. वो थोड़ी बुत परस्ती करते हैं, उनको भी बाहर निकाल दो. Those guys are following this particular scholar. वो उनको भी हम follow नहीं करते. उनको भी बाहर निकाल दो. So there's like a very specific set of practices that we defend, and I guess my family is more from a Barelvi viewpoint, which, as you might have known, Barelvis also are kind of fighting a war within Pakistan. They're trying to defend practices that are usually not considered as part of mainstream Islam. Like, for example, they believe this whole like mysticism aspect.
Right.
हम वो अपने दरबारों पे जाते हैं, उधर जाके हम चीजें मांगते हैं from our
right peer,
whatever, the dead peers, and I've always had a hard time kind of absorbing that. But it is a major percentage that they do comprise a major percentage of Pakistanis.
A good number of them in the urban cities for sure.
I find myself challenging my own family's attitude towards that. The other thing I'm trying to prove is, चलो ठीक है, we have this belief. I don't necessarily agree with it. Right. We have this, okay? But then you on the other side, you got these extremists who are just blowing up any shrine that they see and killing innocent people in there just for what? Like dancing, like Sufi style dancing, and then you consider that so bad you wanted to go kill them?
Right.
Sufis pe lag jang chal rahi hai, Shias pe lag chal rahi hai, Ahmadiyon pe lag chal rahi hai. Then Sunnis have their own different schools of thought. वो आपस में लड़ी जा रहे हैं, नमाज कैसे सही तरह पढ़ते हैं. और जब लोग कहते हैं कि स्कॉलर्स के पास जाओ, तो वो उधर भी मैं जाके थोड़ा सा कंफ्यूज हो जाता हूँ, क्योंकि when you have scholars who have studied, let's agree that they've studied a lot more than us on Islam, right?
For sure.
कितनी साल लग जाते हैं to become a mufti, and to become a grand mufti, even more than that. But then you got these muftis kind of throwing like WWE style taunts at each other. और फतवे लगा रहे हैं, like I'm gonna kill you dog, or इसको मार दो, इसने गलत बात की है, those types of things. And at an equal level of study, when you see that happening at that high of a level, it again raises the question कि सही कौन है, सही कौन नहीं.
I will also end with saying कि this question of कि scholars के पास जाओ, उन्होंने 50 साल ये फला पढ़ी है, 10 साल उन्होंने ये पढ़ी है, अरबी जानते हैं, वो भाई जानते होंगे अरबी, मैं अरबी नहीं बोलता. I don't really care for Arabic. मसला ये है कि oftentimes you can study for 60-70 years. I respect that, man. That's dedication. But there's often something called privilege that comes with being able to study something. And there's also, the privilege of having an experience that somebody that you don't know is going through. For example, if you go to a Sunni scholar and ask, why do Shias do this in Pakistan? They'll have a scholarly answer for you, but the realistic answer is, they have no clue, because a Shia's experience in Pakistan, a mainstream Shia's experience in Pakistan, where they have been persecuted, and almost every family I know has mourned like one dead person assassinated by Sunni extremists. So like that aspect, there's no answer a scholar can explain for that type of thing. They cannot answer like actual real life answer. I just don't think they can, realistically. You can be stuck in the book for forever of your religious book, but there's no way for you to know how I feel, what my journey is. Just no way.
Yeah, your point goes back to that whole no true Scotsman fallacy that you mentioned. Okay, a lot of these scholars, if they disagree with something that happened, they'll be like, नहीं ये सही बात नहीं हुई, असली मुसलमान ऐसे नहीं करते, ये ऐसे करते. And so each one of them are living in this world, this utopian world that they've designed in their mind that doesn't exist. Like अगर ऐसा होना जिस तरह मैं बोल रहा हूँ, अगर ऐसा निज़ाम होता तो कोई किसी को ना मारता. So if everybody was like a Sunni, Hanafi, Barelvi,
who spoke Urdu.
Yeah. कितनी बारीकी में जाके आप इसको डिफाइन कर लेंगे ना. अगर सारे ऐसे होते ना तो सारे ठीक होते.
तो सिर्फ 4 लोग होते फिर इसका मतलब.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it comes down
और
to.
चारों के 4 सही मुस्लिम होते.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. It reminds me of when I was looking to get married. तो मेरी अम्मी वैसे मेरी अम्मी इतना फोर्स्ड वगैरह नहीं मुझे करती लेकिन बातें करती हैं लाइक एनी पाकिस्तानी पंजाबी माम तो शुरू हुई कि मुसलमान होनी चाहिए लड़की तो ठीक है 1 billion मुस्लिम्स आई कैन डू दैट फिर कह दिया पाकिस्तानी होनी चाहिए चलो ठीक है ओके पाकिस्तानी भी बहुत लड़की हैं बड़ी बड़ी अच्छी शक्ल की भी हैं और बड़ी अच्छी कैरेक्टर की भी ठीक है
आई नो अ फ्यू माय सेल्फ या
पंजाबी होनी चाहिए उर्दू स्पीकिंग ना हो पंजाबी हो
ओह शिट ओके ओह शिट
हम कराची वालों से नहीं कर सकते पंजाबी लड़की होनी चाहिए I was like okay now we're getting a little racist here but okay let's throw a little racism into the mix फिर पंजाबी से पक्की सच्ची मुसलमान होनी चाहिए पक्की सच्ची मुसलमान क्या मतलब सुन्नी और ख़त्म पढ़ने वाली बरेलवी आई गेस और like all the practices that we kind of follow
और सिर्फ लाहौर से हो क्योंकि पिंडी वाले काफिर होते हैं सबको पता है.
It was funny. Every week she would introduce a new filter criteria, and I work with data a lot, right? So when you start with 1 million records of data, eventually you apply so many filters that you get down to like 4 records, four rows of data in an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
So that's what it was kind of looking like. And पे हमारे घरेलू किस्म की होनी चाहिए हमारे घर जैसी. So that basically meant कि कोई cousin से ही कर लो यार. तो मैंने कहा यार आप हर हफ्ते आती हैं तो आप कोई नया ले आके आ जाती हैं अपना criteria.
Yeah.
So, again, my mom never enforced anything, but it was just really interesting how she can do that over a topic like marriage. And that's how we are kind of as people too. कि हम इतने छोटे-छोटे ग्रुप्स में चले जाते हैं कि we think everybody else, we have like no patience for anybody else. हम दूसरों को इंसान ही नहीं समझते. Punjabis, for example, they got this weird animosity for the muhajirs and then vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, my dad used to be so racist against Punjabi. It's not even funny. It was funny when I was a kid, but then like I was like, all right, bro, Dad.
Yeah.
This, his racism was in response to the persecution he faced while in Pakistan. It doesn't give him a right to do it, but yeah, it exists for sure. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like we are just religion is one thing, but we've gotten so used to division, just being divisive people, and I think that's part of the. Going back to that, what we were discussing about Pakistan, the misfortunes of Pakistan, I think until you and I should agree on this, until we unite, at least in that aspect, first of all, everybody deserves to live with a right to opinion.
True.
And we can unite in that at least, and at least be able to tolerate each other, then that's a great step forward in progressing this country. अगर ऐसी सोच में रहेंगे कि नहीं इनको मार देना चाहिए, ये असली मुसलमान नहीं है, ये असली पाकिस्तानी नहीं है, इनको बाहर निकाल दो, that type of thing. So this type of a exclusionary mindset is not going to get us anywhere. We Pakistanis need to move out of that.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I just gave a really good speech.
Yeah.
A good thing I was recording.
Yeah, मैं तो एहतराम में खड़ा हो गया था. I was saluting you, bro. See you, man.
Take care.
Alvida.
Alvida.
See ya.
This concludes our two-part conversation series with Ali. I hope you found this series useful and insightful. If you Google at least one thing during or after listening to this episode, I would call that a win. And I hope this can show that even though Ali and I did not agree on several things, and no two people ever will, by the way, that we can still have a respectful discussion. And of course, we can still find common ground. And at the very least, my personal takeaway for you is my message for unity towards the end, that Pakistanis need to unite as a people and put things like Sunni, Shia, Isai, La Mazbi, Punjabi, Pathan, Muhajir, etc. aside, and that no one deserves to die over their background or personal viewpoints. If you enjoyed this episode of Popcord, remember to check out our other episodes. You can easily find all of them on our website, popcord.com. You can also find us on Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, जहाँ भी आप podcast को सुनते हैं, and Patari पे भी हम हैं. So find us wherever you want to listen to us and subscribe. We also really appreciate positive reviews on iTunes. And if you have any feedback, any questions, any comments, we love feedback. Feel free to message us on Instagram. You can follow us at Popcord on Instagram or email us at hello@popcord.com. We love getting feedback. We love hearing from you. And this podcast is specifically made for you, our Pakistani audience. I do this as kind of a side hobby right now. I do it out of pure passion to bring the Pakistani youth together across the world. And I hope I'm somewhat successful at doing that through this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.